Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this exciting webinar where we are going to look at an introduction to Revit Rebar Annotating and Scheduling. So my name is Jacobus Oberholster. I'm an AEC and Procon technical consultant with Micrographics, and you can also see my email address in the bottom left-hand corner. So you are more than welcome to get hold of me if you have any questions or you'd like help with this particular topic or even any of the other topics that we cover in some of our other online content. There is also a live chat that you can make use of, and you are welcome to post any questions you might have in that live chat. It is possible that I might not be able to answer your question, but in that case, I'll just ask you to please send me a mail and I'd be happy to attend to any question that you might have. So, without further ado, let's jump into our agenda. So our agenda today, of course, always consists of a brief introduction, which we've just covered. We have a recap of the previous Revit Rebar webinar. We'll look at modifying rebar parameters and visual styles. We can look at modifying native Revit, well, unfortunately, it should be Revit Rebar, not Rebar, but Revit Rebar tags. We'll look at the tagging of circular and arc distributed rebar. Then we'll look at setting up bending schedules and performing key sanity checks. Now, it's very important that with this particular section that you keep in mind that just that line alone can actually we can actually devote a couple of hours to that and just troubleshooting different processes. So that will be semi-brief. We'll look at some of the key things, but we are probably looking at a webinar that just deals with that alone at some point in the future. And then, of course, we have our typical conclusion. So, right, let's just look at our recap of the previous Revit Rebar webinar. So we had a model that looked quite similar to this. And what we looked at is just the process of actually modeling rebar for slabs, staircases, columns, and so forth. So the previous webinar actually purely focused on those few things. And it's important that if you are not that familiar with modeling rebar in Revit, please have a look at that webinar. All right, so that is just a very brief recap, but like I mentioned before, it just revolved around the process of generating the actual rebar elements for different concrete elements within the model. So an important thing when starting the process of annotating your rebar is actually that you want to look at your visibility and graphics overrides. So just a quick disclaimer, these are some of the best practices in terms of my experience. You might have a very different way of going about it, and that is completely fine. So please don't worry if you are maybe approaching it a bit differently. These are the practices that I found work best for me. So, all right, the first thing I want to do is go to the visibility graphic overrides. And in this case, I have generated rebar for the floor. Now, the reason why I chose that is that the annotating of rebar, the effect of our changes is most visible in a slab. All right, there are of course other approaches to different elements such as columns and beams, but the crux of it all will remain pretty much the same in this particular case. So let's go to our floors category. I'm going to go to transparency and I'm going to set this to 50. Click apply and then OK. And you can actually see all of the rebar in the floor. Now, if you are happy with this, so say for instance you select your floor system, you are happy with how everything has been set up in terms of the different layers and the spacing in different directions. We can even increase or decrease that spacing for the top and bottom, etc. Once you're happy with all of this, what is very important is that you remove the area system. All right, so then you can actually modify the sets in each of the directions and both top and bottom as well. So I'm just going to click on remove the area set, and you can see if you select that set of bars up there, you have the shape and you can modify the spacing further. Okay, very, very important. Otherwise, you will have limited functionality if you look at that area system. The area system is tagged. So if I just undo that so that we have this system again, the area system is tagged. All right, so there is a vanilla tag. So vanilla being as it comes with your Revit installation. So if I go to second floor, you'll see that there is a tag already. Y16 at 300 millimeters each way and each face. And you can stick with that if you want to. I would prefer not to. And so that is why I remove the area system. And I can see these rebar elements. Also, in this particular view, the second floor view, I have already modified, or I should have already been able to modify my transparency. In this case, we can still see it, and that's most likely because of the visual style, and hidden line really does work best, and maybe with a medium level of detail. Right, so in this case, with this particular visual style, you don't necessarily have to worry about setting the transparency of the floor slab. But if for whatever reason you change it maybe to something like shaded or whatever it might be, adjusting the visibility or graphics overrides can be quite useful. All right, in this case, we're not worried too much about that. But again, if for whatever reason the visibility is affected, just make sure to go to the visibility and graphics overrides and make the necessary adjustments over there. So an important thing I'd want to do is I actually want to maybe even splice these bars. So I'm going to go splice, and I'm going to go splice rebar. I am going to say we have by lengths. The maximum length is, let's say, 7,000 millimeters, and the minimum is 1,000, and the run out can be at the end. I can select those guys, and it should all be good. The problem I have with this is that it really clutters up whatever is happening in this space. So the first thing I want to do before I start the splicing is actually just going select none. And this is also just part of modifying parameters, visual styles, etc. I'm going to do the same over here, select none. And we have, of course, in each direction, so that's why it's important. There we go. And then we have last down here, most likely. All right, so that's much better. I'm actually just thinking of turning off my grids as well, just for now. Okay, and we've got these bars. This is the span direction. So let's see about turning that off as well. We might not even need that. Let's see, span direction. There we go. Okay, so we've got these bars. Once we splice them, you'll just go through this process again, pretty much. So that's just something to keep in mind. I might actually change this and then just move this one a bit further away. Okay. All right. So the first thing we might want to do is just adjust the visual style. And there's just something I am quickly want to set up on the side just before we get going. All right. Okay. So we want to change how these display. And again, we can do that in the visibility graphics override. So if we go to rebar, you see there's structural rebar and lines. I'm going to click override, change the color maybe to red. Okay, apply, and there we go. All right, so these are now nice and red, and that is helpful. There's just a slight there's additional contrast within this particular view. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to annotate multi rebar, and I'm going to select this rebar and click and press escape for now. All right, now by default, this just looks absolutely terrible. If I go and change this to just that original view, you can see that every single one of them is now has this arrow, etc., etc. Yours might look slightly different depending on the version of Revit that you're using, but that is just absolutely awful. All right, so we really, really don't want that. We are going to change this tag. All right, but before we get to adjusting that tag, just something to keep in mind is that the sooner you start populating these parameters, the easier it is down the line. Things like the partition, which is pretty much the member. So we can call this slab 2. You might want to assign this. It's actually important to assign these before you start splicing, because otherwise you actually have to modify each bar that comes out of the splice. In this case, if you do it beforehand and you splice, the splice bars will actually all have these same parameters. So very important to start modifying these parameters ahead of time. And even something like schedule mark is quite useful to start modifying beforehand. Now, it's tricky because sometimes it gets so cluttered that it's hard to keep track of it. But once you get to scheduling, you can actually modify the scheduling mark or the schedule mark within the schedule itself, which you can decide whether or not that works for you. All right, so I'm just going to say this is SO1. This is maybe SO2. And they can actually share the same schedule mark. So just important that, yeah, that is information because these two will be the same length. But you can imagine now again, once you get to actually splicing these bars, you have a lot more of these bars, and that might be something to look at. And like I said, again, the scheduling can make it easy because you can format and sort and group these bars and then only actually modify the schedule mark. Okay, something else to look at is something like comments, maybe where we want to set this as T01, T02, B01, and B02, or T1, B1 for top one, bottom one, etc. And that is quite useful. It's easier to do in something like the 3D view, which you can actually see, okay, this bar here is T01, and you definitely want to do this before you start splicing. Otherwise, it becomes an absolute mess. But I'll say this is T1. I'll say this is T2. This is B1, and this is B2. All right, very, very important. Do this before you start splicing, because once you've spliced these bars, they will actually keep these comments, which is very, very useful. Okay, I'm just going to save. Just don't want to lose any of my information. Another thing to actually maybe notice, and I don't know if you would have picked that up, but you'll see that I have additional parameters in the dimensions category. And that bend allowance, hook allowance, and radius actually link in with a key schedule that records this information for a specific bar type and bar size, and it draws it, and that key schedule is populated with information from the SANS 282 2011. Now, reason why I have that is over and above that information, I actually want to calculate a SANS 282 cut length versus using the bar length generated within within Revit, because oftentimes the bar length calculation, even for if you take into consideration all of these parameters and dimension values, is not the same as if you would have done it according to the SANS 282 cut length formulas. All right, so very important. That's why you see these are not in Revit by default. You actually have to go and create it. So what I do in this case is I go for something like I make sure that these two match. So Y16 there and Y16 there. And you can see there that the radius, hook allowance, and bend allowance have now populated. They have values as per this this information down here. Again, or not again, rather for shapecode 20, that's not really something we worry about. But when it gets to things like other shapecodes, this actually becomes very, very important. All right, and I can actually modify this, so I can edit this family. I want to add this from a shared parameters I have that file. All right, and this one, if I go and I say maybe a new parameter, I can select from the sans282 which I've created. I can say that, and I can say okay. In this case, it will just be equal to a. All right, so I can load that into a project. I can override, and if we look now, we should hopefully have that sans282 cut length. Now, again, for shapecode 20, this is not really that important. The reason why I have a sans282 cut length is just because it becomes a column in the schedule later on. All right, so that's the reason why I have that. All right, so if I go back to my second floor view, I've got all of this going for me now. They all have their T1s, etc., B1s, T1s, and so forth. What I want to do now is I need to modify this multi-rebar tag. All right, and that is now our next category, which is modifying native Revit rebar tags. So the first thing I want to do is select the dimension. So that it consists of two things, a tag and a dimension, and I want to edit the type. Now, I have a set workflow I use here, and so you are welcome to, of course, make use of that. Yours might look a bit different, but this is how I fill in this graphics section of the type parameters. Right, so dimension string type stays the same, leader type arc stays the same, and leader tick mark does not change. The show leader when text moves away from origin stays the same, but the tick mark I adjust to arrow filled 30 degree. All right. Tick mark 1 and 4 stays the same. This one, the flipped, or the witness align control, I change to fixed to dimension line. I can click apply. And then I modify these two values, the witness line length and the witness line extension. So I'm going to make that 2 mils on either side and click apply. Then here, the witness line tick mark, I change to none. The center line symbol stays none and center line pattern solid is fine. This center line tick mark arrow filled 30 degree is fine for now. And the interior tick mark display, I change from dynamic to always show. The interior tick mark, I then change from a diagonal 2 millimeter, I change to a full dot 2 millimeters. And then right at the bottom, you see for other equality witness display, tick and line, I change this to tick only. I click apply and OK. All right, and that looks decent so far. You've got the dot, you've got this here with the witness lines, etc., and the arrow, and that's exactly the way I want it. All right, we haven't looked at the tag yet. We're getting there, but I can go here. I can place that, and you see that that looks great. All right, now we need to modify the tag. So that's very important. We need to modify the actual tag, and that is done, of course, by selecting it, clicking on select tag, and then we want to edit the family. All right, so first thing we do is we click on label, or rather, apologies, we click on edit label. So we select the label first and then click on edit label. And this is where we are going to set things up. All right, so the first thing we're looking at is something like the quantity. Then we probably have the schedule mark comes later, We can have something like type name, possibly, which we're hoping is something like Y16, R10, etc. So if we think 16 Y16s, then we have the schedule mark. All right. Then we have our spacing. And then lastly, we can have something like our comments. All right. So we might change this, but let's look. We're happy with what we've got here. Okay. All seems good. So this will look something like 16 Y12s with their schedule mark and then the spacing. All right, so I'm going to click apply and okay. We might come back to this to just modify it. So I'm just going to say load into project. That is fine. I actually want to close this one. Let's close this guy. I'll just say no for now. Okay, so it looks okay. Let's look at this schedule mark and we can maybe make this SO1 as well, or rather SO1 and apply. Okay, so now we can see we more or less have an idea of what do we need to modify. So I'm going to go back to this family. I'm going to edit the label and then I want to remove these spaces. Okay, and then I want to set in a hyphen. This guy, the space there is fine. We can click apply, click OK, and we're going to load it back into the project and override. Okay, so we have a problem there. We're going to go back again, and we just keep on modifying this. The hyphens were actually a mistake there. I actually want to remove those hyphens. So 16, there we go. Schedule mark prefix is fine. And we have a suffix over there. That's all good. And then we can have a space there and click OK. Let's see what this looks like. Okay. So back again, we actually don't want the space by the over there by the spacing. Sorry, it shouldn't have been a prefix, but rather a suffix. And then we want to modify the spacing. So we click on spacing to get rid of those millimeters. Going to click here, going to untick use project settings. We are going to say the decimal rounding, of course, to 0, and the unit symbol is none. So okay, and we go over there, load into project, override, and there we go. All right, so that looks great. If I just think of how these normally work, it does work like that. T2, B1, etc. If it comes to stirrups, it might actually wrap this text so the stirrup is below the line. What you do in that case, you just select this and extend this text box more and more. Okay, that can come with additional problems like those lines on the side, but you can just, or this line at the bottom, which you can just end up deleting anyway. All right, so that's modifying the tag, and you can see that that does that everywhere. Again, don't worry too much about the schedule mark at this stage. That is something that we are going to look at when we discuss our scheduling. Another thing I'd want to do is if I select tag, I want to remove this leader line. And then you can actually, funny enough, you can, if you see these little dots, you can actually align these lines like that. And then what we can do is we can actually move that tag over and it will look something like that. You can either extend it to be outside of your rebar. I prefer that if that is the case, you can see it's underlined, which I don't really like. I prefer to have the text in the middle. That just requires that you further modify this family, get rid of this line, for instance. Let's see. Okay, you can get rid of this line. And then what I'd want to do is I just want to get this nice in the center. And again, that happens with this family. You can see it's actually not in the center at the moment. If I drop this down a bit like there, you can see that's nice in the center, for example. You can have maybe a line extending to it, like if you have your leader line. Let's have a look at that. You can see there, something like that, right? It's completely up to you how you want to do this. That is one way of doing it, or you just do it the way I did it previously. All right, so that is what we've just explored pretty much in a nutshell. I want to remove this, and then I am going to change its position, and then let's see if the aligning works as well now. The aligning does not work as well now, of course, because we don't have that underline. So we might need to actually just position this in one way or another. Okay, again, completely up to you how you want to approach something like this. All right, so I hope that helps just in terms of how to modify the display, especially just this dimension line. I think this is quite, this is how we conventionally do it. And I hope that you found this useful so far. All right, next up on our agenda, we are going to look at the tagging of circular and arc distributed rebar. So I'm going to open up a different, just a different project. We'll look at that. We'll come back to this project later on. Okay, so we've got a circular slab here, and we've got a circular column with some rebar in it. Now, when it comes to the annotating of circular arc distributed rebar, the method that you use to model the rebar will determine how easy it is to tag it. All right, so if we go to just a different plan view, I just want to make sure that we can see that rebar. So that rebar is down here. What we used in this case to distribute this rebar is an array. All right. The problem is that the array does not put this rebar into a rebar set, meaning when you annotate it, you can only annotate a single rebar at a time. Right. So if we click multi-rebar, again, nothing happens. But if we go for our single rebar, for instance, we can see we can tag it, and it really just becomes a single bar. All right. So that really is important. Let me just make that 0. Okay, that is something important to take into consideration, because it means that there is a bit of a difficulty when it comes to your circular columns, for example. All right. Unfortunately, the rebar path, which I would have loved if it actually worked for a circular column, and hopefully in the future it will, that sort of mitigates the problem a little bit. All right. So if we look at the slab, and I'm just going to go to level 1, for instance, we don't have any rebar in the slab yet. So we can actually go to the 3D view, select path, select the slab, and then we need to define this arc, which is actually better in this view. So I'm just going to define this arc for the rebar. And that's all good. Okay, you can see that it comes with a tag. And this tag can be modified. I don't like the fact that this symbol is here, but again, that can be modified. You can see that this is a specific type of tag family. You can modify this structural path reinforcement. So if I change the bar length to something like 4,500, you can see that the tag updates. And if I change the bar spacing to something like 450, for an example, I want to actually turn this hook off. Okay, this tag updates. One of the things we don't see at the beginning is just a number or the number of bars. So we can go to edit family. If I select this and I edit the label, I can actually go to let's look for the number of bars. I can position that there and maybe put in a hyphen for an example. Oh, sorry, that's the prefix. I don't want it as a prefix. I want it as a suffix. And we can load that into a project and close. So let's do that for circular structures. Okay, so now we can actually see the number of bars. So if we change this now, we make it 400 for an example, we can see that that changes. This is this is quite a tricky tag to manipulate. It's just something to keep in mind, that yeah, if you used any other method, even free form, you will have difficulty. So if you used free form, so usually we do want to use free form if we have um, sloped floors, etc., the path reinforcement isn't always going to be super useful. You might then look at something like um, freeform rebar, and then your tagging also becomes difficult. So only under the circumstances where you've used the path reinforcement tool do you get this tag that luckily or fortunately updates automatically. But when you use other methods of distributing or detailing or modeling the rebar, you will run into trouble in terms of the tagging at this stage of the game. All right, so just to keep that in mind, um, for future reference, that the tagging along arcs and circles can be tricky. So like I mentioned before, with the circular column, because we've distributed these straight bars the way we have using a radial array, they're not one rebar set, and that means the tagging becomes a bit of a problem. Now, of course, you can manually override these values and so forth, but the problem is that if you change anything, that tag won't update automatically, which is really, really important. That is not something that you want to mess around with. So hopefully Revit will, or Autodesk will, with a future update, improve this process and even potentially allow you to add bars to a set, and not make it not make it difficult for you to do that. You do have things like Greytex Power Pack, which can have rebar functionality, which allows you to add different bars to a set, but that in itself has its limitations. Right, so please do keep that in mind. The way that you model bars for circular elements can make it very difficult for you to actually do the annotating later on. You might have to do the annotating manually, and just keep in mind that the tag will not automatically update. So for whatever reason, if I delete one of these bars and I have a parameter which I set in terms of the number of, if I delete that bar, that parameter will not update automatically. Whereas for the path reinforcement, which is quite nice, it will update. So let's just look at our floors quickly just to see what this looks like. Okay, it's strange for me in this view that that our bars are not actually visible. Let's have a quick look as to why that is the case. Let's go for rebar. Yeah, there's nothing happening really that I'm too worried about. I can change some of the graphics overrides as well. Maybe even select it and go to the graphic overrides or view visibility states. I'm in level 1. There we go, view unobscured. Okay, so that was also something I could have done if you find that for whatever reason the visibility graphics are not working as well as they should. Okay, just a quick one. If you also look at these bars, like they distributed very well, the tool works very well. However, you can see that whereas with other bars, I can ensure that only one bar displays. If I click edit bar, because you can see that there's not a lot I can do in terms of the visibility like I could with the previous model, where I can actually set its presentation. You can see that for some reason that is not actually allowed in this case, which is very odd for me, if I'm being completely honest. It's very odd that that is the case. Um, Whereas with freeform, if I remember correctly, you can actually set its presentation. And again, just highlighting that as as long as you're not working with um, circular elements, the available functionality is phenomenal, and I believe that it is very useful, or actually that it is production ready. Let me rather put it like that. That I actually do believe it is production ready with circular and arc elements. Or I think that there's still a bit of work to be done. Like you wouldn't want to give a contractor a drawing like this, because imagine now you have spliced bars coming into the center. You'll have a real problem with just how cluttered this drawing will look, and whereas the column presented us with some other challenges. All right, so just keep that in mind. There is some work to be done here from Autodesk side. There are ways around this, but mostly they require some sort of a manual override. All right, so just keep that in mind. We can maybe quickly have a look at our freeform. I'm not keen on spending too much time on something like that. But if we look at freeform rebar, we can have a we can just look at a surface, and yeah, I'm not too keen to to um, to mess around with this too much, because of course we have the struggles with our host surface um, and start surface and things like that. So it's better that if we created certain sections, etc., etc. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. That's not something we're going to play around with now. I'd rather get into scheduling, but freeform works very well if you've created if you have different sections, if you actually create sections and stuff like that through the slab and so forth. All right, I was just going to show you some of the limitations, but I think we have discussed that at length. The last thing, let's just look at, if we remove the path system, what happens. And you can see when we remove the path system, this basically becomes exactly the same problem as we had with the bars in the column, that these are now a series of individual bars, single bars, which do not belong to a single set, which means that our conventional tagging does not work. Right, so please do keep all of these sort of things in mind. All right, lastly, what we are going to look at is just the setting up of a bending schedule and performing key sanity checks. All right, so going back to my previous model where I have my second floor, what I have done is I do have rebar in one of these footings. I do believe I did not um, remove that rebar. Yeah, okay, that's perfect. All right, so let me just actually close this other model, just so that we don't get confused. Okay, so now we need to get to the process of actually scheduling our rebar, and there are some tricks. Uh, my recommendation is starting with the basics and then systematically adding to that. What I want to check here though is that, have we defined the partition? Yes, we do have the partition defined. Okay, that's perfect. Just want to make sure that this, we don't need to set that actually to anything, because the sans 2A2 cut length is calculated off of the A dimension anyway. So it's quite easy with these straight bars. However, with these other bars, let me actually change this quickly. Let's go for a foundation. Okay. With these other bars, you can see that this actually becomes quite important. So this is for the shape code 38. I actually don't have the sans 282 cut length for this one. I do believe that I have created it. Let me just have a look actually. Let's go to section. Let's see, rebar 37, 35. Let's have a look. No, 38, 34. Okay. Yeah, actually I haven't added that parameter for quite a few of them. You can see here for shapecode 72, this is sans 282 cut length. All right, that is unfortunate. I genuinely thought I had added it for quite a few of them. But all right, let's actually do it. I think, let me have a quick look. I do have a sans 282 with me, and I am going to quickly turn to the shape codes. I do think that it's 38. Okay, 38 is at least in the sans 282, so that's great. And we do have a cut length formula for that one. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this family. So I'm going to go to edit family. And again, I created some shared parameters. So just keep in mind that you do need to create a set of shared parameters. I am going to say new parameter, go sans 282. There's a sans 282 cut length, and I'm going to add that parameter. I do need to add the other three as well. So there's bend allowance, because they can form a part of my formula. So there's hook allowance, and let's go for the last one, which is radius. Okay, these are as per sans 282, the different tables for mild steel and high yield steel. And then for 38, the sans 282 cut length is actually A plus B plus C minus a radius minus 2 times the bar diameter. Okay, you can see 980 has accepted the formula, which is fantastic. I can click apply and OK, and I can load that into my project and close. Yeah, I can probably override this one. Let me just go to, this is one of the panes. It's actually just good to sit once off and finish it, hey, rather than going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So libraries, English, South Africa, rebar shapes. I do want to set the number of backups to 1, South African specific, and I want to override that guy. Yeah. Okay, so now if I select these, there should be an additional set of parameters. You can see there's the sans 282 cut length, radius, hook allowance, etc. So just to make sure in the identity data that I set these to Y16. Okay, and I have to do that for every set. You can see it updates those values, and the formula now makes use of the relevant values to calculate its sans 282 cut length. I'll do the same for the other one. Again, this does not come with Revit by default, so just keep that in mind. I set this up using shared parameters and a ski schedule. All right, so let's go to our 3D view. We've got all of this wrapped up and ready, and we now need to generate a schedule. So I'm going to go to view, schedules, schedule quantities, and I want a structural rebar. Okay. All right. Now we need to build this up. Honestly, I would do that slowly and then add what I need as I go along. So this is where some of the sanity checks come into play. So the first thing I have, I'm modeling this off of Procons ProBar 2D schedule column headings. All right. So yours might look a bit different. I'm going to go for partition. That would be the host name. All right. So the member. Then I want to go for bar diameter. Okay, the bar diameter. Then we're going to go for our sans 282 cut length. So that's all the way down here. We can even use the sans 282 2011 identity data because that will match the bar diameter. All right, we've got our bar mark and so forth, or the schedule mark, and then I'm going to add A, B, C, D, and E. All right. What I might like, so the bar diameter is fine, but I might actually want the sans 282, or it can be the type name. So type, there's type mark, shape. Shape is important. That is the shape code. Let's have a look further. Your type mark works, I do believe. No, that comes from identity data. That won't work. I've got the sans 282 2011 over there, but we can have a look. Let's do our quantities, for instance. That might be a bit of a problem. So let's see what the quantities look like, and then we can maybe look at some workaround with the count field, which, by the way, you can't use as is in formulas, which absolutely sucks, but there's an easy way around it. Okay, so I'm just going to set that for now. We've got the partition, we've got the sans 282 cut length, which is great. Got the shape code, we've got the sans 282 2011. We can rename that to something like the bar type and diameter. So we can say something like bar type and diameter. Actually, I want to have a quick look at just what that schedule looks like. So let's just see, where do we get that value in? All right, I do believe it should be in the diameter column anyway, because we want to know what type of a bar it is along with its diameter. All right, you can see for the other ones it hasn't been set yet, so we might go back and set those. So let's select these bars. I'm going to filter them out. Check none, structural rebar. Okay, we can see that they're all Y16s. So then we're just going to change this to Y16. This does not update automatically. So if you change the bar size, you have to come back and make sure that you've changed that parameter, if that is the one that you are using in your rebar schedule. All right, so you can see here is our schedule mark, and that's why I recommend actually doing this in the schedule. You can see that they should actually pretty much be the same. So I'm going to set that to SO2 as well. We've got SO1, SO2, and we don't indicate where in particularly where in that element these bars are located in the schedule specifically. And we can see that for the shape code, for some reason, we're not seeing the A, B, and C values. And that could be because there are different A, B, and C values. In some cases, we do have different values. So we might actually go back. Oh, it might be that there is, because of how that shape code works, we actually need to check because it uses the hook allowances. All right, so these are some of the challenges that we often face. Shape code 38 actually just works with the A and B value, but a C value as well. All right, so we actually need an A, B, and C value. And in this case, you can see, oh, that's for shapecode 35. That's interesting. It's not supposed to be that. We actually need a 38. All right, so let me go and modify that. These should be a shapecode 38. And we shouldn't have any problems. I'll just redo them. That really isn't a problem. So I'm going to go for rebar. I'm going to go for a 38. That is what I did originally, funny enough. All right, there's that one, and it's a Y. Let me make that a Y12 rather, just that we have different values. There we go. And then we have perpendicular to cover. Okay, so let's just make sure these guys have the right values. Okay, this guy now needs a sans 282 cut length, which we can do very quickly. I actually missed that one. So let's just go Y12 and this one as well, Y12. Okay, to match that value over there. All right, let's edit the family quickly. I'm going to look for that cut length formula for a 38, which is actually what I worked with just now. I think I just missed actually that that I didn't select the right shape code, but it's all right. It's all good. We can just add these parameters in again. So there we go. Again, these are shared parameters. Okay, and you need all four. All right. Then let's look at the sans 282 cut length. Again, this is A plus B plus C minus radius minus 2 times the bar diameter. Okay. All right, that seems good. A plus B minus radius minus 2 times the bar diameter. And there's the radius. So if I change that to 10, we see that that becomes 1770. All right, that's all good. I'm going to save this. I don't want more than one backup. I'm going to save it in this folder and I'm going to override Yibble. Okay, let's have a look. Perfecto. All right, you can test these out. You can see that there's the B value, A and C, and that is correct as per which one is the B value, A and C, as per SANS 282. Some of these families might need to be modified. Okay, but let's go to our rebar schedule. And we can see that looks all good. We actually just need to give them a partition, which I can say is base 1. And I'm going to assign this partition to the other one as well. All right, and go back to our schedule. All right, so here we go. So there's slab 2, schedule marks, etc. And now we can start by modifying these groups. So if we filter and things like that, we don't have to stress too much about we don't have to itemize every instance, but we do want to check things like these formatting values. If we look at quantity, we might want to say something like calculate totals, for instance. Okay. But we haven't sorted through anything. So the first thing we need to do is maybe look at something like the partition. Then we want to look at the SANS 282 cut length. Then we want to look at something like the shape and maybe then the schedule mark, for instance. Okay. So far, so good. So we've got base 1, 1916, shape 38, bar type and diameter is Y12. The quantity is 10, which is correct, and the schedule mark is 1. We can now change this, right? So I'm going to change. You can see it's 1 now. If I go back to section 1, I select, as you can see, that its schedule mark is 1. So I'm going to go back to the rebar schedule. I'm then going to change this now to B01, and this will be B02 because they are different. If I go back to schedule section 1, you can see now that that schedule mark has updated as per the schedule. So that's where these schedules are really, really nice. And then we need to check a few additional things. So we've got the partition base 1, we've got slab 2, we've got that cut length, and we've got a total quantity of 188. Okay, so I want to change this now to no calculation. And you can see there the quantity is now 94 and 70. All right, so that is something that you really have to check out for, and why I recommend approaching it slowly but surely. Okay, so this quantity, you do want to set its calculation to calculating totals, because this is now calculated, this is displaying the quantity basically per set. Okay, so we can check that out. So if I go to fields, we can actually see if we can have that information displayed. We can see here should be a quantity per by rebar set. Okay, so let's do that. We'll say this is over there. We'll say okay. And there you can see quantity by rebar set and then the actual quantity. So this we can rename to something like total. The schedule mark is the that is our bar mark, or something like that. That is the total. Then this would be something like the number of bars. Um, in a sense that that is number of bars per partition, basically, in some way. Okay, this is where it can get tricky, because we can have multiple of the same partitions or additional partitions and so forth. So just something to keep in mind as we're working. So we can have total bars, and there we have number of bars, bar type, and diameter, and then the shape code. So this would be SC for shape code, and I would want to move that one further down. So the shape, I want to move down over here. Then it's bar mark. We have the total quantity. We then have the sans 282 cut length. We have the sans 282, and so forth. Okay, and that's okay. It's just we can find ourselves in a position where we have some additional challenges. Right, so let's go back to our 3D view. We now want to add some rebar, so some area rebar, and I want to define it for this area. Right, I'm going to lock it on those edges. And I'm going to change this one. So I'm going to change this one to Y20s at 450. Okay. All right. Okay. And then what we might want to do is just remove this area system. And again, here we want to select these bars. We want to say this is for slab 1. All right. We're not going to change the schedule mark yet. We're happy with everything else. We might want to define this, or we should actually. And then in the comments, this will be T1. All right. This guy will be T2. And it's a Y20. Okay, this one is a B2. And it is a Y20. And this one is a B1. And also a Y20. Okay, we must make sure that we give them all the same partition. So let's see, the partition will be slab 1. All right, and let's go to our schedule. So if everything is set up correctly, our schedule should have updated quite nicely. So we go to rebar schedule, and it seems like it is all okay at the moment. So we can change this then. So we can just say, so slab 1 bar 1, and slab 1 bar 2, and that's slab 2 and 1, and that's slab 2 and 2. All right, this does not necessarily mitigate all of the problems you can face, but this is, I think, a really good recipe for approaching your rebar scheduling. Right, when it comes to things like the mass, we actually need some additional parameters. So if we go to second floor, let's just, or rather 3D, this would be our last thing to look at. If we select these bars, what other parameters do we have? So we have the reinforcement volume, and that is for that particular set, which can be useful. It can be useful, but I would feel, would I feel more comfortable? I would maybe feel more comfortable by looking at the cross-sectional area, but then again, the volume can work quite well. So this might be a parameter that you want to report on, and then convert that to something like convert that to cubic meters, and then you can multiply it with the density of steel. What is going to happen is you don't want that particular column to necessarily be visible, and so then you can hide that column. All right, so that is something that we will probably add to the list for our webinar only next year. So we're looking at a webinar for 2026 where we'll purely look at scheduling and some of the further pitfalls. But this is a really good start, and I'm very sure that with this as your base, that you will be able to start the process of setting up your schedule for everything that you're looking to do in Revit Rebar. All right, so in conclusion, unless we're looking at things like circular elements and arced elements, the approach is actually quite simple, and we can modify our tags accordingly. And I would recommend, though, that you set up all this information, so the tags and all that, set it up in a template, and make sure that that is default across all of your projects. But outside of the arced elements and so forth, I think the approach is quite good. And with what we've discussed today, with looking at the tags and so forth, as well as our scheduling, I do think that under these circumstances, Revit Rebar is most definitely production ready. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, whether you put that in the comment section below or send me an email. We would love to actually accompany you on this journey of adopting a 3D Revit Rebar workflow, and we would love to work alongside you, man. We can then work together on some of the challenges that one might face when it comes to 3D Revit, 3D Revit, or 3D Rebar, 3D Revit, 3D Rebar production issues, and how we can iron out those issues. We'd really love to work alongside you. So, right, that is the end of our webinar. So, thank you so much for those who joined. I really hope that you found this insightful. I generally try to work through it incrementally so that we can actually see how do we deal how do we work with issues as they crop up, rather than just a purely polished webinar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you're going, okay, but when I tried to do that thing, this issue popped up. When I tried to do that thing, this issue popped up. So I really hope that you found this insightful. And again, please like this clip if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel, and then please reach out if you have any questions. Other than that, I hope that you have an awesome week further, and I'll see you for one more webinar in December before we close for the year.